On November 4th, 1979, the Iran hostage crisis began after the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was stormed. It was the start of the longest hostage crisis recorded in history. One of the hostages was a U.S. Marine from Homer, Illinois. His name is Paul Lewis. Paul, I'm glad to have you here with us.
Thanks, Grace. Good to be here.
Yes, okay. So obviously you have an incredible story to tell, one that not many had to endure. But I want to take us back all the way to November 3rd, 1979. Will you just take us back there?
Sure. I woke up, I was in Frankfurt because I had to stay over. And I got to the airport in the morning, and first trip on the Autobahn, we were driving 100 mile an hour in this Mercedes cab. I got to the airport, it was foggy, they warned about the plane's going to be late, and I think I don't want to do this. And back then, Pan Am had a flight 1 and 2. They both went around the world. I was on, I don't know, 1 or 2, but I was on this worldwide flight. So the plane got there a little bit late, but we were going to make our time. It was a direct flight to Tehran. And it was an experience in itself. It was like being in the UN. I don't know how many languages the flight attendants spoke, but and a lot of Middle Easterners and people going farther. And honestly, I was afraid they're going to light a fire in the aisle because people were doing things in the aisle. They weren't sitting down, and when they rang the bell and told us to buckle up, I noticed a lot of the women started putting the chadors on. They were dressed Western with makeup, and then they started covering up. And my introduction to, I guess what we call now was a failed state, happened about 15 minutes later. I got to the airport, I thought there was a riot, but it was just people excited because everyone had bags of gifts and clothing and things from London or Frankfurt, wherever they'd been. And I saw 3 Marines in the front of the crowd, and I thought, well, I'm safe.
So you had just arrived in Tehran. Obviously, set the scene of the airport. You're mentioning that all of this unrest is kind of happening as you're arriving. What did it look like when you landed?
Well, it was, first thing I noticed is there were a bunch of people with blue jeans and field jackets with rifles. Most those people I met didn't speak English, but they had to see your passport. They could say that. And I remember them fumbling around with it. There was one policeman standing in a corner that didn't do anything. And then I went through customs, and they told us to pack our uniforms on the bottom of our sea bags so they wouldn't be seen. And they kind of rummaged through. But before that, when you checked in, and they checked make sure you had a visa. And mine was interesting because when I was transferred, the revolution was in full force. And the Iranian embassy was reluctant to give me a visa because the visa stamp said the Imperial Republic of Iran. So our consular officer convinced them just mark it out and write the Islamic Republic. And I wish I could have that passport because that was the visa looked like. They told you to declare cash. You don't carry much cash on these trips, particularly to someplace like that. So I had about $50. I laid on the counter. The guy just swept it in the drawer and said, go, move on. The lady at customs was really reasonable. She spoke perfect English. She'd probably studied here, and she didn't bother me at all. I got to the 3 Marines who were waiting for me through the throng of people waiting for their relatives. And we got in a van, and I could tell it was armored because it was really squishy. It was too heavy for the frame. And we never stopped between the embassy and Tehran. We ran all the lights like everybody else was doing. And it was eerie. It seemed dark, but on about every second corner, there was a bunch of guys with rifles and field jackets around burning cans. And occasionally, a pickup truck with an automatic rifle. We finally got to the embassy, and I had to drive around a little bit because somebody had taken a Khomeini poster down off of our wall, and there were a group of people upset about it, and the security officer was negotiating them to go away, and then went into the motor pool. I did a tour of the embassy with the gunny, and I remember joking. I said, I spent 2 years in the infantry. I'm not afraid of anything, but I want to go get on a plane and leave. We have 27 acres, 14 Marines, 35 buildings. We can't defend this place. I did notice when we walked around there'd been virtually no security improvements. They tried to kill everybody in the previous February on Valentine's Day. And they'd put some metal casements about halfway up the windows of the offices, but the Marine Guard booth still had 2 rounds hanging in the bulletproof glass. When you walked on the carpet, you could kind of kick up the tear gas smell. I thought we're just not prepared for this. We're in a lot of trouble. As we were walking around the embassy, it seemed there were a lot of locals on the compound. I wasn't sure how that happened either. I guess their employees and friends. The Marines had set up like a rec room, and we called it the Mushroom. It was a big underground vault. There had been intelligence people there before, and they had a DVR set up and a TV, and some of them were probably their guests. But all the locals were telling the gunny, tomorrow's going to be different. Tomorrow's demonstration is going to be different. But they didn't say exactly how different, but I asked the gunny, they seemed awfully concerned. He goes, they come by every week. A couple million people march by, chant. Sometimes they jump over the wall and the militia will take them out. He said, tomorrow's no different than any other day. But he said, we are going to be busy till about noon, so don't come over and check in till about 1 o'clock. So but I was not concerned. I was literally thought I'd made a mistake. When I came, I thought, what could be more interesting than witness a revolution from the safety of the U.S. Embassy? When I got there, I thought, we're in a city of a couple million people, and it appears everybody hates us, and we stand out like a sore thumb. Huge profile in the better part of North Iran, where all the kind of wealth starts. The slums are to the south. I went to bed that night, didn't sleep very well, jet lag, being up a couple days. I was tired when I left Budapest, and I was still tired, and I was in the shower the next morning about 9:30, I think it was, and a Marine kicked the door open and said, we're being attacked. They've called us all back to the embassy. By the time I dumped a sea bag, I didn't have any clothes out. I dumped a sea bag and put on a uniform, didn't pick up my ID card, my passport, but by the time I got dressed, they'd already cut off the south side of the embassy. Our guards were smoking cigarettes, talking to the attacking guards, the attacking people. We could identify them because they had a string around their neck with a white laminated piece of paper. And it was in Farsi. I didn't know what it meant, but later on they told me that stood for the students following the Imam's line.
So once the door was kicked down and you had cleared your bag to try to find some clothes to put on after arriving the night before, what happened from there? Did you stay put?
Yeah, since I couldn't recall, we went to there was one apartment in the top of the embassy that was sort of the Marine social area. We had a bar and chairs and things. So that was our gathering point if we couldn't get to the embassy. So we went there, we observed what we could see, and talked on the radio to people at the embassy. I did notice that we knew something was bad because suddenly we heard Iranian voices on our radio. I don't know if they had them from before, they hadn't changed the crystals, but we could hear them breaking in. I was a senior Marine, but the newest Marine, but that still made me in charge. I asked the 4 other Marines with me, we could hear that we finally heard them start breaking down doors, and I asked curtly, Jim Curtly, I said, you guys know where a Western Embassy is? And they said, yeah, we know where they're all at. So I called the political officer who was in charge, Ann Swift, and I said, I'm here with 3 other Marines. Is it okay if we go out the back? I think we can get out the back and go to a Western Embassy. He said, no, help's on the way. We don't want people scattered all over town. And along that way, we'd heard that most of the people got out of the front. The consulate was a separate building. It was attached to the embassy, but the door was on the street to make it more convenient. So we could hear those people getting out. Jimmy Lopez was still in the consulate because they were coming in through the second floor. He threw tear gas. They told him not to, and I think his response was, whoops, too late. But they were asking us to do absolutely nothing to resist or create something more difficult than they're already in. So they kicked our door down, they captured us, and there were weapons. Marines in the embassy said they could see women with rifles under their chadors. The guy that came with us had a pistol. We broke our radios, so they couldn't have them, and we got captured. Now, we went down about 2 floors. I think we're on the 7th floor of the Bijan Apartments. Went down about 2 floors, and a group of gendarmes, the national police, showed up. And compared to local police, they appeared very professional. They had sharp uniforms, were well dressed, in good condition. And an argument ensued between the policemen and the people capturing us. The only word I could understand was Khomeini. Pretty soon, one of the policemen pointed his rifle at me and motioned me to raise my hands. I thought, good, they're going to capture us and we'll be safe. And I put my hands back up and they left. I think the threat of offending Khomeini was too great. And the gentleman in charge he looked terribly embarrassed. And my thought before was, let's make a pretty good story home. I write a letter, we almost got captured and we got saved. And we went downstairs, and I'm kind of a history buff, so when I found out, and I knew what was going on in Iran. When I was in Camp Pendleton, the infantry, the riots had started in Iran, and I'd spent most of my time reading about Lebanon, because I thought if we were deployed, that would be where. There were a lot of Iranians in Los Angeles, and the Shah's sister had a mansion, and I remember reading in the paper that these crowds were protesting in front of her house. When they told me I was going there, I went to our library and got everything I could read. And as we're being captured, we went through the gate. Our paid guards did nothing. And I remember seeing a wave of people running at us, and they were frothing at the mouth. That might be an exaggeration, but I'd never seen people with such hatred in their face. And I'd read a story about a diplomat back in the 1920s who'd done something to offend Islam, and they pulled his arms and legs off. Took him out of his carriage and literally pulled his arms and legs off, and I thought, they're going to pull my arms and legs off. The people with us made a cordon, and more rifles showed up by then, and they got us to, we called them little yellow houses. They were itinerant housing. If somebody was TAD, they got a little yellow house to stay in, and that's where I was first captured. When they shook us down, I had no ID. Within a day or two, and the first 2 days was really chaotic. We were just tied to chairs and moved around for seemingly no reason, but we're always bound and blindfolded, which makes time pass very slowly. And then they came with somewhere they got in a roster of Americans in the embassy, and my name wasn't on it. And so they assumed I was a 22-year-old spy. So I went over for wherever they kept those guys and went through some interrogations. People say, you were tortured? I said no, but I think I had some enhanced interrogation. Since I came home, I've had both my shoulders operated. I got some nerve damage in my left arm. Things that don't hurt when you're 22, they start hurting when you get about 50, when your arthritis sets in. So it wasn't John McCain stuff, but it wasn't pleasant by any means. And the thing that bothered me, they would blindfold you when you were being interrogated, so you couldn't see them, but they would always have somebody walk behind you, and it made you very tense. And then when they stopped, it was exhausting because you've kind of, I joked once that getting ready to die is exhausting because you squeeze your adrenal gland flat, and then you just have to go down. And I felt like that for about a month. I was always handcuffed. For some reason I was special. I got to keep mine for about 45 days before they finally took them off. But one point I want to point out, in those early days, we were being held sort of by like colleges. So if you were engineering students, they were completely awful, very hostile, very arrogant. But for a time, a couple of weeks, I was held by medical students who I could identify with. They were very excited about overthrowing this government, and they didn't want a theocracy. They wanted an Islamic-based democracy. Now, in retrospect, it appears that at some point they didn't intend to stay long. They were going to make their point and leave. But there was a struggle between the Western moderates and Khomeini for control. And I think that's when Khomeini announced it was a good thing, and the government collapsed, and then he had total control. By the end of it, I think no one could find out a way to get out of this without losing face. So it took a change of a president.
So running the show are a bunch of college students that are just trying to make a difference for their country.
Yes, and the ones that stayed the time were the most radical, but they were gray-bearded students around also. And you could tell who was, Iranians are very differential to people of superior positions. They'll defer to a doctor, be very polite to a doctor, very polite to their professors, and maybe scream at one another. But when one of the key people walked in, you immediately knew that they were somebody because of the deference that the guards gave. And the handful of older people always had deference. And, the person in charge of the floor was deferred to.
When you were being interrogated, what kind of information were they trying to gather?
Well, they wanted to know who worked where, who spoke Farsi. They wanted me to open safes. I didn't. And we didn't have POW training. Marines don't do that. I mean, it's just, if you get captured, you don't sign anything. They'll kind of trick you, like in a training exercise. Okay, here's all the equipment we took from you. Sign the bottom that we have it, so we can give it back to you. Well, then they lop your signature off and they write a statement above it. So that was about it. In embassy school, someone asked what happens if we get captured, and the person speaking said, "Who wants you?" They want the deputy chief of mission or the first secretary or the ambassador. You might get shot, but nobody who wants a Marine. You're not worth much. Now, our code of conduct was you make attempts to escape, you give nothing but your name, rank, and serial number. But I really began, we thought a lot about escape, but where are you going to go? It's 1,100 miles to anywhere. You couldn't do it without killing someone or stealing a car. We all grew beards, hoping if we did get out, we would sort of blend in. But, I've been to survival school in the Sierra Nevadas, but I didn't know what you could eat in Iran. And it was a long way. You had to go to Russia or to Iraq, and neither one of them was really a good place to go. You didn't know what the Russians would do to you, but that was a long ways across a mountain range. In Iraq, you would have to go to the Persian Gulf and then find your way through the straits where there was a contested territory. And then by July, there was a war there.
So let's talk about your time in captivity. Where were you held? Who were you with? What did that look like?
We were moved around a lot at first. And I was at the deputy chief of missions house, one time in a huge dining room. We were sleeping under a big dining room table. A banquet table, seat 50 people. I was in the yellow houses initially, the itinerant houses. Then we just kept getting moving, randomly moved around to keep us disoriented. Weren't allowed to speak to one another. I didn't know any. I only knew about half a dozen people by look. Matter of fact, I ended up on the floor back in the itinerant house, bound hand and foot. And Jimmy Lopez, I could tell he's a Marine, he's the same age. He, when the guard left, he goes, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Lewis, a new guy." And he goes, "Did you say something at the airport?" He said, "We're doing fine." And I was help. Before I went, they told me they were going to take 14 experienced Marines from other posts and send them to Tehran to double the guard force. They want to send new people from school. And I asked the gunny, "Where are you going to build all these extra people?" And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, they told me there going to be 14. He goes, "I asked for 14. I wanted 100. I asked for 14, and little Nick here, there." He said, "You're it, buddy."
Oh my
I
gosh.
said, "I'm the cavalry."
Wow.
So that was a joke. Things are going just fine. There's just occasionally getting a rocket attack until I came. They moved us around a lot. They would take us away and interrogate us in different parts. I was in the mushroom for a while, which is depressing because you didn't even have daylight through a window. It was just, you knew it was daylight when they turned the lights on. You knew it was dark when they turned them off. But I was trying to sleep it away. Anytime I was tied up, I just tried to sleep until I couldn't. But that becomes depressing. So early on, I just started doing sit-ups, push-ups, running in place. And, when you're just running in place, it takes a long time to when you're 22 to get a heart rate. So did a lot of push-ups, a lot of sit-ups, a lot of running in place. And part of my routine as things settled down was I just exercised 6 hours a day, did 3 2-hour sessions. I think I've been looking for them. I can't find them. I have my trousers I wore that year. And the waist is about 26 inches. And there's all kinds of stitching and blood on the back side where I'd worn through my tailbone. And every time I did sit-ups, I would bleed on my trousers. But the better I felt physically, the better I felt mentally. So I was kind of adamant about, keeping that. The other thing is early on, we saw the Iranians taking military gear out of plastic. And that meant the government was supporting them. And that's when things kind of changed. A lot of them went away, I think, out of discouragement, thinking we didn't sign up for a long-term, like the medical students, never saw another medical student. And I thought, now I got to decide how to cope with this. Before it was okay if I knew whoever came to rescue us would be amateurs. So wherever I was at, my plan was, where do I flop this chair to not get shot by mistake, or on purpose, because I wouldn't be able to tell who was who. Then it became, this could drag on. How do you deal with that? So I decided I'm going to stay in shape. I'm going to eat everything they bring me, and I'm going to walk out of here. I did find out that sense of smell is the strongest taste. Sometimes I couldn't breathe while I ate the stuff. There's things that they liked that I didn't, but I wanted the nutrition. But the bad thing was their big meal is midday. My big meal is in the evening. So we'd have the big meal midday, you play cards, sleep it off, work it out. And then at night, you got a bowl of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. And it was 40 years ago before I could eat chicken noodle soup.
Oh, I believe it.
Despised it. And it doesn't do much. I mean, you just drink it and it's done. So I'd wake up hungry, you had bread and cheese, then we had the big meal, pile of rice with something on it. We kind of joked they must have butchered with chainsaws because always bone shards and whatever goat. It's like goat. I don't think I ever saw beef, and they don't eat pork. So I assume that they just chop up a goat with a chainsaw and throw it in there. So I was, about 1st of December, they broke us into, we call them pods. There were 5 of us in the chancellor's house. Nice room, had our own bathroom. No hot water, but we did have our own bathroom. And it was Jerry Plotkin, he's the only civilian. John McKeel, who I spent the rest of my time with. Rocky Sickman from St. Louis. Billy Gallegos from Arizona. And we had our own little room. I started thinking, I'd convinced myself that it would be great for them politically and from a PR point of view to release us at Christmas as a sign of goodwill to all men. Also, we found out that they released, I think they told us that they released most of the women and all but one of the African American staff members because I think they really thought they could create a revolution in our country, a disturbance. And they didn't understand us that well. The first Christmas came, and it was really discouraging because Hamid Delayr, the good guy who would come around and try to get us to sign statements, and he always regretfully said, if you don't do it, they're going to take me away, and the security students are going to have you back, and then it's just going to be a worst time of it. We started talking because they couldn't make us quit. We figured out they're not going to shoot you for talking. That would be kind of stupid. And they finally gave it up so we could converse. But the first Christmas, Hamid Delayr and his people came and spent a lot of time asking about how various religions, I'm Catholic, so I talked about the midnight mass and confession. Well, we weren't going to get to do that. But we could have a sacrament. And they talked to the Methodists and the Presbyterians, but basically it was a Christian service. So they told us they're going to have this dignified service, the night of it, I had written a note, roll it up and look like a, I don't know, not very large. But there are two people no one seemed, when you changed rooms, everybody kind of shared their stories or what was going on where they'd been. There are two people we hadn't heard anything about. And I knew their jobs, so we were concerned about them. So on this note, also, I wasn't even sure if my parents knew where I was because the message to going to Washington that I've arrived hasn't gone out. It's never going to go out. And we hadn't had a lot of media attention by this, mostly the Red Crescent and occasionally some ministers and a congressman from Iowa. This guy named Hanson showed up. And I couldn't figure out, why is this congressman walking around, but I can't leave. But anyway, the first Christmas came, and what I thought it would be was nothing like it was. At the door, they grabbed my blindfold, pushed me through the door, the Klieg lights were on, and I blinking, and I see this table, this table with all kinds of food and candy on it, and apples and oranges, and I would have killed for an orange. And then I saw the Reverend Sloan Coffin. I knew who he was, so I'm a history geek. He'd been a CIA agent that got out, became a Unitarian minister somewhere up in the Northeast, and thought everything wrong with the world was our fault. He was the minister that gave our service. So he was dancing around, playing the piano, and then he asked us to read Bible. First off, he asked us we had a guard sitting between each of us. He asked us to hold hands with the person beside us and sing hymns. And there was no way I was going to do that. I just wasn't going to. I didn't care what they did to me. TV's on, I'm not doing that. Then he gave me the Bible reading, and I slammed the Bible shut and threw it to the Iranian next to me. And on the way out, he tried to bless me, and I said, "This is all BS. This is a show." On the way out, they don't make them anymore. They used to make a thing called a $100,000 bar or something. It was a long woven caramel chocolate. One of those on the table, and just to say I got something, I grabbed one of those, shoved it in my mouth, paper and all. And then I thought, I have a cavity on my lower left side. I got to be careful not to pull that cavity out. That would be awful to have a filling come out.
Yeah, no kidding.
I saw a Marathon Man. When they came back, we got strip searched. Didn't find my note, but it was depressing because I already had myself on a plane by that time of night. I still had my boots and my uniform. They did steal my boots when I took them off that night. I didn't have them anymore. They never got my camouflage utility. They loved them. I never took them off. I showered in them. I washed them in the shower, never removed them from my body. They would dry when I went back to the room. And I came home with them. McKeel and I didn't participate in the service, so we went to about 40 days in the cooler. They put us in looked like a pantry where they kept office equipment in the basement of the embassy. They'd broken the glass out of the window. And it's December in Tehran. It's fairly high, pretty temperate. It was about 40 degrees out. And they left us in there each with a blanket, and refused to let them know what bothered us. They're handcuffed all the time, but we act like it was not a big deal. And McKeel finally got sick, and they moved us out. But we got to be very close because we watched each other. So I spent the rest of my time with John McKeel. They occasionally moved somebody in with us, and they seemed to always be having trouble. We'd kind of buck them up and send them back. I don't know if they were trying to depress us, but we had one poor gentleman that was, he had been through a bad time, and when they came in the room, he would get into a fetal position and quiver. And I was in my mid-morning nap, and I heard a ruckus. And I looked up, and two guys with ski masks were poking this gentleman with rifles, and he'd urinated on himself and was quivering. And McKeel started screaming, "Leave him alone." And they pointed the rifles at McKeel. So he looks around, and being a good Texan, he grabs his plastic spoon that they gave us to eat, broke the end off, and threatened to cut their throats. I found it hilarious. I just started laughing. I was rolling, and they're pointing, they were telling me to be quiet, pointing the rifles. I couldn't quit laughing. And McKeel's screaming at me about not helping him, about just laying there like an idiot. And the guards looked at McKeel, and they looked at me, and they looked at Jerry, and they finally just left. And then Johnny ripped into me for not getting up and helping him. But I said, what was I going to break my spoon? Then I wouldn't have a spoon to eat with tonight.
Wow.
Another frightening time is we'd gotten SpaghettiOs instead of Campbell's noodle soup. And they thought that the finger bowls for the dining room were soup bowls. So you had these little bowls with little tiny handles on them. And I was trying to move my bowl from the desk beside my rubber mat to the floor where I could eat it, and spoon slipped out. Previously, they'd hung these pictures of Khomeini all over the place, so we took them down and put them in neat piles by their size. When I spilt my SpaghettiOs, I just grabbed a piece of paper and scooped it up and threw it in the garbage can. Well, it was a picture of Khomeini. And when they searched our trash, they found that picture, and the room filled up with Iranians. And I told John, I always joked, I thought they were going to pull our arms and legs off. But they cuffed us and then knelt on the cuffs to crank them down. And by the end of the day, our hands are swollen and turning blue. But when they'd come in, we were playing chess and acting like nothing was going on. And his name is Mahmoud. He was one of the more reasonable of the unreasonables. Came in and asked why we insulted the picture. I said, we had no intention. I spilt food on it. I threw it away. I couldn't take it off. I didn't tell them I scooped it. And then, I don't know, an hour later, they came and took the cuffs off. I guess they decided it was a no harm, no foul kind of thing. But they were livid. I do remember arguing with an engineering student about Islam. I didn't know much about it, but what I could find out in Budapest where I left. But I did know that they were supposed to treat guests well, and they kept saying, you're not prisoners, you're our guests. And so if I'm the guest, why can't I walk out the door? And they said, well, it's a safe. I said, well, why don't you let me try? I'll take my shot. And they were doing the thing about Islam, and I said, so why don't you just shoot us and be done with it? And he goes, oh, we'd never kill you without a reason. I said, what if Khomeini said shoot you? He goes, oh, we'd shoot you. You wouldn't ask why? No, because we knew we'd have a good reason. So it was sort of split about I guess you'd say relatively well-educated people had been exposed to the West going back home and getting in this very strapped society.
So at what point in time, you guys were there for 14 months, is that
14
right?
14 and a half, 444 days.
444 days. At what point throughout that time did you start questioning, gosh, when and how is this going to end?
Well, after the first Christmas, I thought I got to deal with this. And I was already working out. I thought I'm going to be fanatical about this. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be fast if I ever get a chance to do anything. Or if it gets to the point where we're going to try to do something, I don't want to be, a bowl of jelly. But I kept thinking it can't go on like 7, 8 years. I mean, it's happened to people. People in Vietnam were there 7, 8 years. I thought, my God, I'll be almost 30. So McKeel and I came up with an idea. We would pick a date. And so we got rid of the open-endedness. So July 4th, for instance. But when you got within 40 days of the date, you had to have a new one decided 2 weeks before the date. So we left ourselves plenty of time. We weren't really occupied. So we would debate this thing and argue almost to fists about the date, what made sense. And it passed the time, and we never passed another date. Even at the very end, when we'd seen Algerian diplomats, we'd had physicals, they were feeding us a lot of protein, I wasn't going to give a date. Because my date was already into, February, something or other. So I never passed another date after the first Christmas.
How did you keep track of time?
They took the back off my watch, but they gave it back to me. I had a watch. Nobody else had a watch. Mine's an old Seiko, like self-winding where you shake your wrist and it winds yourself up.
Yeah.
You're supposed to do it when you're walking, but we weren't going anywhere. And the other thing, we saw that massive traffic going back and forth about, you can't do this while we're here, need to downsize the embassy, send people home. They're going to send dependents in within a matter of days. 2 weeks later, we'd had women and children there too. So that really, it was a combination of being disheartened and angry. Thinking, somebody decided, it's worth the risk. It's not if a few of them get killed, or maybe they get captured. And I always resent the fact that everybody turned Jimmy Carter into the victim. Jimmy Carter is the reason this happened. He was the only one that could have stopped it. He succumbed to pressure, and from the Rockefeller family, Nelson Rockefeller, and Henry Kissinger. He was trying to get the Camp David Accords approved. Kissinger and Rockefeller wanted to shaw in, and he was their friend. And Kissinger threatened to not give his blessing to the Camp David Accords. And he succumbed to the pressure. And if you're going to be the President of the United States, you just can't do that. And, I was always around Marines and Marine officers. We were given all the rope you want in the world. And, you had a task in hand. If you got it done, you got rewarded. And if you didn't get it done, you got kind of left. I never thought anybody in my chain of command would have just said, yeah, we can lose a few. Now, and we knew that there were operations we might lose 20% of us, but that was a known risk. It's not like I fell down and they left me here with a sprained ankle, and that's what I felt like. So I was extremely angry about that. And sometimes when you got nothing to do but think, I would think about that, and I'd be tempted to write a letter, sign one of those statements and lash out. But I knew, in your heart, that's not right. So to kind of keep it in perspective, I said, someday, we always say in the Marine Corps, you stand on the shoulder of giants. That, it's taken 250 years to come up with this stellar reputation. Nobody has a right to shorten that pile. So, and I knew I'd be doing that. I'd knock a pillar out. So I thought, I'm going to have to run into somebody who was my age, or maybe younger, on a place like Iwo Jima, who gutted it out, watched hundreds of his friends die or be wounded, and didn't do anything wrong. He kept going forward. I would have to be able to say I brought no dishonor in the uniform I wear. And when I get really discouraged, I think about that. You got to make that walk. And you got to be able to say, I didn't add anything to the pile, but I didn't knock anything off either.
Now, when you were there, you talk about the dates that you'd argue over. You talk about that hope of holding on to something, of like a tangible time that maybe things would end, that maybe this would all be over. Throughout that time, were you ever afraid? Did you ever just experience fear?
It went from being bored out of your mind to frightened them. Early on they would just, a couple of them be laughing, and we didn't know what was in the pistol, and they just play Russian roulette to watch you flinch when the trigger hit. They thought it was hilarious. I remember waking up in my chair, tied to the chair, and there was an Iranian sleeping with one of our shotguns pointed right at my knees. And I thought, my God, if he starts, he's going to blow my leg off. But you can't go anywhere. We had a mock firing squad one night, and I got all ready to die. But my mind, a couple things happen when I get under stress. Things seem to slow down. Like I feel like I'm the only one moving in this slow motion thing. There's a fancy word for that. I don't know what they call it. You can go the other way too, or you can slow down and everything speeds up. But that would happen, and I'm always trying to rationalize. So when on the way down, I was reading an article in the Paris Herald Tribune about Judge Ayatollah Khach, the hanging judge, having the Savak people come in for their trial right before they were executed. And before they went to trial, they always let them write their last will and testament, no matter how bad they were. And while I'm standing against the wall, some people said they're naked. I was in my pants. But as they're giving commands and pulling the bolt home in their rifle, I kept thinking, they didn't give me time to write my last will and testament. And why would they shoot me in this hallway? The rounds are going to ricochet everywhere because we're in the basement of a building. I mean, they're probably concrete walls. So I'm always thinking why they won't do it, but I never thought they weren't going to do it until they stopped. And that's when you go back and you think, I just felt like I ran a marathon. I'm completely exhausted. My right leg kept quivering, and I was hoping they wouldn't see that. I was hoping if they're going to kill me, I hope I die with a little bit of dignity. I'm not going to fall on the floor and beg for mercy. I just hope I just die. If they're going to shoot me, he took it okay. Now, there are people said they're never scared. They're lying. They're just lying. It's like people saying they were never frightened in combat. They're just lying. I was frightened every time I got in a helicopter. They just didn't seem like flying machines. So, yeah, and then it would go back to just killing time. The other thing they did, and McKeel and I moved around until the rescue attempt. They found out about that a couple days after it was over. But we could tell something was going on because there was a lot of activity, a lot of yelling, and people running around. And that night they came in and said, "Pack your stuff, you're moving." So, that was pretty reasonable. Except this time they put us in cars. And I could see blue lights flashing. I thought maybe we're going home. So it's about 40 minutes to the airport, about an hour in. I thought, they wouldn't get lost. And we ended up in Gom because they scattered us all over the country. We went to a Posteron Revolutionary Guard outpost, which had been a military thing and had the metal slats in the window so you couldn't throw a grenade in. And it was, spring. We just went from high altitude down to kind of the desert. And they hung blankets on the windows so people couldn't see up, I guess, through the slats. And I woke up one morning and I heard someone being lashed. I thought, Christ, I wonder if that's one of us. And they did, 2 or 3 women and a couple men. And it was an awful sound to listen to. And one of the guards came in and I said, what's with that? And they said, we have 2 adulterers and somebody else had said something bad. And they got 50 lashes. And I thought, I can't imagine doing that. Now I know it's happened in history, but I can't imagine doing that to somebody. I could shoot someone, I can fight with someone, but I can't imagine tying them up and just beating them with a lash. It's beyond me. So, occasionally you talk to these people and they kind of sound like Americans, but then you had to realize they got there's a different process in there that we don't really understand. And I thought they maybe understood us better than we understood them, because it took us a while to kind of figure out that the ones that were left after the first 20 days were kind of the worst of the worst. If Mullah said, slit your throat, they would.
Well, 444 days passed, and then finally there was a day where things started to shift and there was hope that presented itself. It's confusing in general why you guys were there, when a revolution had just taken place. But let's talk through what that day was like on the day of your release, 444 days later.
Well, we kind of knew it was coming because after we'd been scattered around, they consolidated in a condemned prison, Comité prison. Well, again, we heard dissidents being beaten and lashed and tortured. And we got the evening air raids from the Iraqis when the war started in the summertime. But they came in and said, we're moving to a different place. This is better. Okay. And we get led into a place, we're blindfolded or handcuffed, and they open the door and I'm in, it's like a large hotel room. But they had welded bars on the windows so we couldn't get out. And they said, this is where we're going to keep you. The other thing I just did to kind of keep some sanity is I passed notes to anybody using the restroom. Jimmy Lopez and I passed notes. You roll it up in the toilet paper because they don't use it. Stick it under the toilet lid or something. We never got caught. Some people wouldn't do it, and I could understand that. So, but you know, I was 22, they were 45 and had a wife and kids, so maybe I understand it now. They'd moved to this place. I thought, you know, this is good, that it's better, but it could be bad because maybe this is a permanent place. It's much more defensible than just putting us into a non-secure part of the embassy or an apartment building. But now the prison, that was pretty secure. You couldn't even do a tap code on the walls, they're so thick. So, by the way, we learned I knew the 5x5 POW tap code. It's too much trouble to do Morse code. So like an A is a tap and a B is 2 taps. And anyway, but it takes a long time to get a message when you're tapping 24 times.
Yeah.
So the bad guards, the most hostile guards, didn't seem to be around anymore. We had a guy we called Hamid the Midget. He was a short guy, nice guy. You know, when we were in the prison, I don't know if I looked hungry, but he would bring me dates. I love dates. I told him once I was worried about my teeth. I'm not getting calcium. He drove all the way back to the embassy, which was probably 25 or 30 miles from where we were, and got me powdered milk. He would keep me stocked with powdered milk. Now, it's full of weevils, but you know, just shake it up and drink it and you get a little extra protein. It was too much trouble to pick them out because later on there are a lot of weevils, but you got calcium. So it got better. The food got better. A lot of protein. We started getting mail. Mail had been very sporadic. And I got 1 or 2 letters from my family. And
How did they know where you were? How could they address the mail?
oh, they just sent it to the State Department.
Wow.
They just put Tehran and it got there. Somehow it got there. You know, so I got letters to hostage. And I got the most mail from a missionary in Papua New Guinea. Entirely disinterested in what she was doing with her pygmy clients. But I do remember I got 2 or 3 letters from my parents. And it was hard to get mail because they read it all, so screen it. And I knew my grandmother died because one letter they talked about what she was doing, the next letter my grandmother just didn't. And she was in her 70s. She ended up dying of breast cancer. But I just knew. Right before the second Christmas, the diplomats from Algeria came, and they said, "We're getting this worked out. We think it's going to be over." But that's mid-December. We didn't get out till January or late December. But we were getting turkey and chicken almost every meal. They delivered our USO packages. I got 3 sets of underwear and 3 sets of T-shirts, and I came home with them still in a wrapper. I was hanging on to them because you never knew you might need them. Because I'd worn the same pair of underwear for the whole. I just wash in it.
Yeah.
I mean, my pants held up my underwear. The band was gone.
Oh my gosh.
And I came home with those. I got a stretchy thing, one of those rubber things you can work out with.
Yeah.
They dumped a bunch of sporting news on us. That's when I found out Illinois had this guy named Dave Wilson who almost beat Ohio State. And I thought, I haven't been gone that long. I don't remember recruiting a freshman that good. A lot of changed on us. Finally, at Christmas, the Algerians carried letters home to our families. They said these will be delivered because we're taking them. You don't have to worry about what you say. Then the Iranians took us in and tried to get us to say we were treated well. I said, today I was. Early on, I wasn't. I could never walk out the door. I'm not going to give you that. And they said, you ever been tortured? I said, probably no, but I've been beaten and I've been abused and I've been locked up. So when the Algerians came at Christmas and took the letters, I'm thinking, okay, it's true. But remember, we didn't get out till the 20th of January, so they went through all these bank things. But the Algerians are still coming around. And then the night before we left, we went to a room and they had medical equipment set up, and they gave us all a good physical. My blood pressure was a little high. That's bothered me. And then they took us down to a room, and we got to pick out shoes. All the boots were gone. I had some Melly slippers. The Shaw thought that you shouldn't burn petroleum, you should use it for petrochemicals. So they had these little rubber slippers. So I left with my Melly slippers. And my bag of goodies, my needle, I traded my utility shirt for the red one that had the eagle on it. Oh, the night before, the day before, it got so routine in the last place we were. In the morning, Hamid, the guy must have worked 24 hours a day. Hamid would come and say, "Do you need anything?" And then he'd come back and he'd give me your list. Need toothpaste, toothbrush. And one day I was screwing around, so I need some soap. We had a cold shower every day. I think we did get hot water one afternoon. So I put hacksaw plane tickets. He looked at the list, he goes, "You don't need the hacksaw, and we're going to have plane tickets." He left. He came back, he gave me a stack of Newsweek and another stack of Time magazines. I got to start reading about it. So it was loosened up enough that we're starting to believe it. And then one evening they just came and said, "We're putting you on a bus, you're going to the airport." And they did, and they're trying to tell us not to speak. They were trying to put it on one time, nobody's paying attention. And Mike Matrinko spoke Farsi. He'd been there in the Peace Corps, and he'd been a consular officer and became a political officer. Well, he heard them call us sons of dogs or something. So we made an appropriate reference to Iranians' mothers. They drug him off the bus, and as we're driving away, we can hear him beating him. He was screaming, not because he was a sissy, because he wanted to know he wasn't on the bus. And he said, I talked to him after he got out, and he said, "I'm thinking, nice job, hot shot. You got to get one back, and they're going home, and I might have to be here with these guys forever." And I guess while they're beating him, somebody came out and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, he said, "You got to get him to the airport." So he got to ride in a Mercedes.
Oh my gosh.
We got to the airport though. We sat there for about 40 minutes, and it was about noon Washington time when he took off. They waited till Ronald Reagan raised his right hand to release us. One last shot at Jimmy Carter. We went to, the plane. We must have counted heads 100 times. I kept thinking. So anyway, we get out. When they took us, we had to go through one more demonstration. People yelling at us, and "Death to America." And I ran up the stairs to the plane, and an Arab-looking guy with a submachine gun stepped out. And I thought, man, what am I going to do now? I can't jump down there. I'll break my legs. The crowd doesn't like it anyway. Because when we were scattered around the country, some people were so far away they flew. They're not going to fly us to the middle of nowhere. And the guy came out and he said, "I know you're concerned. I'm an Algerian commando. Once you cross the door, this threshold, you're safe." All right, I'll bet on that one. So I walked in, and I guess the Algerians are so afraid of something happening. The plane had been there a while. They replenished it with food and stuff. They wouldn't get anything locally. They flew it in. So we got on a plane, we got a head count, people were shaking hands, but it was really kind of subdued because there's a war going on. And we're going to fly out in this 737 or whatever it was. And, wheels up, we felt pretty good. And then the pilot announced, "We've just flown into Turkish airspace. If you look out the starboard window, you'll see the F-4 escorting us to Algiers." We stopped at Algiers, and the national media is there. I'm not accustomed to that. When somebody says, obviously CBS Live, what do you have to say? I had nothing to say. And I think, and I really didn't understand why they let them in there as we're trying to get from point A to point B. But I kind of flippantly said, "It's good to be out of Khomeini land." And that got picked up. So we get through that. Warren Christopher came. We thanked the Algerians for their intervention. And the Algerians were just revolutionary enough, the Iranians would accept them, but sophisticated enough they could work with the West. The Algerians are kind of in the middle. They had the big guerrilla war against the French. But so they had credentials. So we got on Nightingales, the medical planes. They gave us all parka. Still got that parka. Probably wonder if I can pull it on anymore. And now we're with Americans. They're just saying anything wrong with it. We got a full medical staff on a plane with us. There's 6 or 8 of us on a plane, and we flew to Germany. And that's when it kind of sunk in that it was not what I expected. They said the last time they closed the Autobahn was when John F. Kennedy was in Berlin, and they closed it for us. And I remember seeing reporters' cars trying to get, I don't know how they got on the Autobahn because it was closed, trying to get newest, and police cars had just literally inched them into the ditch. And there were a lot of people on the sides of the road. And we got to the hospital in Wiesbaden. I think they've closed it now, but I wasn't sure what to do. A lot of officers and medical staff had their families there. And a little kid ran up and asked me for an autograph, and I wasn't sure what to do. And he was serious, so I did it. But they isolated us, I think, for 3 days. But time, my perception of time had become an Iranian day. You wake up, you work out, you play cards, maybe get another workout in before you have lunch, because after lunch you had to wait a while before you could work out. And that was, and did the same thing in the afternoon, then you went to bed. Well, there was events happening. So we get in, and we met our commanding officer. He was the CO when I left, so I knew who he was. We had this really barrel-chested, big neck, bald-headed guy. And I thought he was the XO, the second command. When I shook his hand, I noticed he had a chaplain's cross. He was a Lutheran chaplain, had been assigned to us. And the chaplain, first thing they came around to tell us how our families are doing. My sister was junior high, just starting high school. My little brothers, they're in grade school. I had no appreciation, now I do, that I have my own kids, of just how devastating it was for my parents to get up every morning with the uncertainty. I guess since I was young, I assumed they're adults, they'll deal with this. My dad's health, he died a few years later. My mom goes to church. Well, they went to church every morning. Reporters would try to ambush her walking into the church. And it was, but anyway, in Wiesbaden, I noticed I was getting dizzy. So I had the blood pressure thing going on too. And I thought about it, I haven't been to bed for almost 2 days. And I just crashed and burned. But it said, I can't remember, it was 3 or 4 days, but we really did need that decompression time away from everybody, because even that was kind of stressful. Just the shock of going from there to here, just going home would have been too much. I wouldn't have been I don't think I would have handled it very well, or I might have been in jail a couple times. We just got to talk about where everybody had been, what had happened, how you felt. Somebody had taped, they were running these VHS tapes. Each tape was 1 month of the news, so when you weren't at a meeting, you would watch the news. We cheered the U.S. hockey team like we were there. We saw the news, the demonstrations, just kind of got caught up. But even now, though, somebody will talk about something that happened in 1980, and I feel like I got a hole in my brain. It just, I don't have a concept. Now, I've caught up with most. As I got home, I read, everybody sent me years of all their magazines. I would sit out in the garage for hours and read those. I liked it in the garage because nobody bothered me. Nobody came out there to bother me. But I still had the blood pressure thing on day when they're in the middle of it. I remember going in, and the doctor the guy that was my shakedown guy, we called him, the guy gave us charge of our physical page. Our physical was like almost, like a small book. He was talking to another doctor about blood pressure medicine. I thought, I am not doing that. I'm 180 pounds. I don't smoke. I've been working out like an idiot for a year. How can I have high blood pressure? So then they said, you have to go see the psychiatrist. And that was like, I don't need a psychiatrist. I'm young and tough. This guy had been, as a retired captain, they brought him back. He dealt with people coming back from Vietnam, so they brought him back. And I went in and I was terribly rude to him. That's like yelling at him, being rude to a Marine colonel. You just don't do that. And he took it real well. And we sat and talked a couple hours. It was all right. He said, come back this afternoon, talking about time. So I walk in, we do the same thing. And he said, come back in the morning. I said, he goes, yeah, you got to come back in the morning. I said, I'm not going to order you, but you need to come back. So when I walk in, I said, we're going to do any psychiatric crap, or we're going to just sit around and talk. He goes, and we sat around and talked. And then he gets his blood pressure cup out, because psychiatrists are MDs. It's 160 over 80. Or 116 over 80. I said, that happens 155 or something yesterday. He says, you internalize. And I had to let you vent some things. He said, remember that. The rest of your life, you'll internalize things and have a heart attack or something, or stroke, because you need to vent.
Going back to civilian life from military, and know that you kind of were like, okay, let's put a seal on the military life. What was it like adjusting back home?
I decided not to stay in. And they offered to commission me, send me back to college, but I thought I put my life's, I always joke, when you join the military, you write a check payable to the United States and you leave the amount blank. Up to my life. People that have been very brave, who suddenly lost their edge when they had people they cared about, that they wanted to go home to. So I thought about that, and I didn't have any idea who I wanted to marry or anything, but I kind of wanted to have a family. So I left. I did a 60-day speaking tour, which was therapeutic. I was telling our XO, the second in command of the battalion, that had all these nonprofits, chambers, Kiwanis clubs, schools asked me to come and speak, and I said, I don't know how I could ever have time to say thank you. And he goes, well, we'll let you do it as long as you want, as long as you wear a dress if you lose, and you don't have to recruit, but the recruiters will just take you to every place they can line up. And I did that for 30 days. Sometimes, I don't know, some days I would do 4 in a day. So it was good. And I really did appreciate the welcome we got. I mean, I felt like the whole country really cared about us. So, but the problem was I couldn't get out. I'd walk home and there would still be reporters in the yard. And it got down to the Trib and the Sun-Times. I thought you give a press conference and it's done.
Yeah.
Nah, everybody's got to get their own angle. So these 2 women were just in my mom's front yard, and she hated them. They were the last hangers on. So I came home one day, and the one from the Times became a Washington correspondent. I forget her name now, but she used to be on TV a lot. I talked to her once in a while. She said, look, the Daily News just went out of business. There are 3 reporters looking for every 2 jobs left. She says, if we don't go over the story, we may not be employed. Then they're, not much older than me, 25, 28. I said, okay, I'll give you 1 hour. So I let them in, and my mom was, gosh, she was mad. And she'd already had her belly full of reporters. Now, local ones are pretty good, but the national ones, some of them come with a preconceived story. They're trying to fit you in. I found that out pretty quick. So I let them in. I take their coats in their mom's bedroom. She took them out of the bedroom. She put them somewhere back in the kitchen, or somebody threw them on the floor. And I heard her set an egg timer. And 60 minutes later, it goes ding, and the coats come flying out of the room. I don't like the I don't know what to call it. I remember a guy coming up to me. He's only a year older than me. And he's had some drinks. And he says, if they'd have done anything, we'd have come over and bombed them to hell. I said, so when do you leave? I assume you're one of them. And you're willing to do that. Are you willing to go do it? That would bother me. And then occasionally somebody say, why didn't you shoot? I said, because we were ordered not to, and by the way, I didn't have a gun where I was. Well, you should have done it anyway. You don't do that. I think that's part of the reasons Marines go on embassy duty, because you're ordered to do things that is not in your nature. The other thing that I always forget to talk about is they make it very clear when you go on embassy duty, you might be the first American somebody meets. Don't leave a bad impression.
Yeah.
So we took it serious, and when they said don't, we didn't. I want to say something that applies to this times. I at times felt very sorry for myself. What are the odds of being here out of 300 million Americans, out of 192,000 Marines, out of 1,100 embassy guards, out of having our company? But then I thought, you are here. Now, this can kill you. It can make you bitter and weak, or you can walk out of here. So I think when I hear a lot of the talk today is, I refuse to be a victim. And I think people who are habitual victims allow themselves to be. You don't have to put up with it. And I can't find anybody that I've met lately that can put their victimhood up with what I was doing. You know, not every day, but quite often we got ready to die. And most people can't do that. So overall, I decided to make this an advantage. I think it's a strength. I've been tempered. And no matter how bad it's been, and there have been some bad times in my life in business and such, I can always say it's been worse.
Well, you've had to endure things that no one has ever had to even think about. And now I know that you're a Central Illinois resident, and you have quite the story to tell, and I'm sure that many people would still love to hear it, and I hope that this allows more people to do just that. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate your time of service and what you endured, and the way that you represented our country during that unbelievable time. So thank you for your time here today, Paul.
Thanks, Grace.